Welcome to Sleepy Classic Tales. Today I'll take you high up into the Andes, into a hidden valley cut off from the world for centuries, and to a man who meets there a society that sees differently than he does, or rather, that does not see at all. The Country of the Blind by H.G. Wells, published in the year 1904. A brief word beforehand. There are two versions of this tale. The original of 1904 ends openly and thoughtfully. Wells later rewrote it, and in this second version of 1939, there is a different, more dramatic ending with a landslide. Today we follow the original version of 1904, for it is the better known and the quieter one. It is a story about what happens when a man is convinced that he is superior to others, and about who really decides what is real. Make yourself comfortable, let go of the day, and come along. There was an old story that people told in the mountains of Ecuador. It told of a hidden valley high in the Andes into which people had once fled to escape the tyranny of Spanish rulers. They found there a good country with meadows, sweet water, and pasture, and they settled and lived in peace. But then an earthquake came, and the mountains shifted, and the way into the valley was buried forever. What happened to those people afterward no one knew exactly. Only one report still made its way out, brought by a single man who had left the valley before the way closed. He told that a mysterious sickness had fallen upon the settlers, a sickness that caused all newborn children to come into the world blind. And so arose the legend of the Country of the Blind, of a lost valley in which all people lived without eyesight. 14 or 15 generations passed, and in the cut-off valley, the blindness slowly spread over all until the last seeing man had died. But the people managed. Their remaining senses sharpened, their hearing and their sense of touch grew fine to the point of the marvelous, and they arranged their whole life, their houses, their paths, and their work so that they did not need sight. And with time, there vanished from their language and from their thinking even the very concept of what seeing had once been. Many years later, a party of English mountaineers set out to climb a hitherto unconquered peak of the Andes. Their guide was a man from Bogota by the name of Núñez. During the ascent, he began to slide on a snow slope, lost his footing, and fell. His companions saw him slip away and vanish, and they took him for dead. But Núñez lived. The snow had broken his fall, and he slid and rolled an enormous distance down the mountainsides, buried, battered, half-stunned, until at last he came to rest far below. When after a long time he came to himself again, he raised himself with effort, and he saw that a valley lay before him, a green, friendly valley, enclosed by steep rock walls on every side. Núñez climbed down into the valley. He was bruised and hungry, yet he was alive, and the valley that opened before him looked inviting. There were meadows and pasture, streams and farmland, and in the distance he made out a settlement. But the nearer he came, the stranger everything appeared to him. The houses were oddly built, without windows, and the walls were daubed with colors. Yet the colors ran crosswise and every which way, in stripes and patches without any order, as though someone had applied them who did not see what he was doing. And the paths between the houses were paved with a care such as he had never seen, every stone smooth and even, and along the edges ran gutters. He walked on, wondering, and then he caught sight of the first people. 3 men were working in a field. They raised their heads when they heard him, yet they did not look in his direction, but turned their ears toward him. And as he came nearer, Núñez saw their eyes. The lids were closed and sunken as though the eyeballs beneath had shriveled. These men were blind. And in that moment, the old legend came back to him, and it became clear to him where he was. He had found the fabled country of the blind. A feeling of adventure and excitement rose in him, and with it, a thought that ran through his head like a refrain. He knew the old proverb, and he said it over to himself as he strode on. In the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Here then, so he thought, he was a seeing man among nothing but the blind. Here he must be superior to them. Here he would rule. With the confident step of a young man walking into a great good fortune, he approached the three. But the men stood close together, a little frightened, and one of them said in barely intelligible Spanish that a man was coming down from the rocks, a man or a spirit. Núñez spoke to them, and they led him into the village, and there the whole population soon crowded around him, men, women, and children, and they felt him over with their soft, sensitive hands. They smelled him, and they listened to every word he said. They led Núñez before the elders of the village, and there he began to speak. He told of the great world outside from which he had come, of the mountains and the sky, of the sun and the stars, and above all he spoke of seeing. But what he met with he had not expected. The elders listened to him and understood not a single word. They believed him nothing. They did not even grasp the words he used. For 15 generations these people had been blind and cut off from all the seeing world. The names for all the things of sight had faded and vanished. The story of the world beyond the rocks had become a children's tale that no one believed anymore, and the people in the valley had long since ceased to trouble themselves about anything beyond their rock walls. They had built themselves a world of their own, with their own order and their own explanation for everything. Above them, so their wise men taught, arched a smooth roof of rock, from which the dew fell, and the world consisted of this valley and nothing else. Clever men had arisen among them and had examined the old traditions from the seeing days and dismissed them as idle fancies and replaced them with new, more reasonable explanations. And into this firmly established picture of the world came Núñez now and spoke of seeing, of the sun, of the stars, and of a world beyond the rocks. To the blind, this was nothing other than the babble of a confused man. They listened to him and said to one another that his senses were still imperfect, that he stumbled and spoke senseless words. They came to the conclusion that he was a newly created being, only just born out of the rock, and not yet in his right mind. He must be led by the hand and patiently instructed until he learned to find his way in the world. And so they treated him, not as a king, not as a marvel, but as an unfinished, somewhat backward person who had to be taught everything. Núñez laughed at this at first. He would teach them soon enough, he thought. Soon he would show them what seeing means. But the teaching did not succeed. Núñez tried again and again. He told them there were things they did not understand, that there was something in him that they lacked. He tried to explain seeing to them, yet the word itself no longer existed in their language. When he said he could see something, they answered him calmly that there was no such word, and that he had better leave off this nonsense. They were patient with him, as one is patient with a sick man, and the more often he spoke of his abilities, the more certain they became that something was wrong with him. Núñez now lived in the valley and had to conform to their rules. He discovered that the blind divided their day differently than he did. They worked when it was cool, that is, at night, and rested when the sun shone. For Núñez, this was a torment, for at night he too saw nothing and was as helpless as they. And in their own domain, they were far superior to him. Their hearing and their sense of touch were so finely developed that they perceived his movements from a great distance, that they found him by his breath and his footsteps wherever he hid himself. When his instruction bore no fruit, Nunez lost his patience. His pride reared up. He resolved to assert himself by force and to show these blind people who was master. He seized a spade and made threats, yet what happened next drove him to despair. The blind were not to be intimidated, for they did not see the weapon and did not fear it. They came at him from every side, calm and closed ranks, guided by their hearing, and Nunez fell into a panic. He ran back and forth. He dodged where there was no need to dodge. He stumbled in his anxiety to keep everything in view at once, and when they encircled him, he took to flight and ran out of the village, up into the rocks, where they did not follow him. So ended his revolt. He spent several days outside, hungry and freezing, and tried to find a way out of the valley, but the walls were too steep and there was no escape. Half-starved, he at last returned, grown humble. He begged forgiveness and explained that his wildness had been only the confusion of a newly created being. The blind took him back in after he had received a punishment, and from then on he was the least among them, a servant who was used for the simplest tasks. So Nunez lived from then on in the valley, subjected and tolerated, the last in the order of the village. They gave him the simple work, the carrying, the digging, the coarse tasks for which no particular understanding was needed. And he submitted. The pride with which he had once descended had fallen away from him, and he learned to fit himself into the rules of this world. They gave him a name as well, because on his arrival he had spoken again and again of a distant place called Bogotá. They called him Bogotá, and this name stayed with him. To the blind, he was a man with imperfect senses, a little simple, to whom one owed forbearance, and at bottom they treated him kindly. They were not cruel people. Their community was peaceful, orderly, and clean. Each had his place and his task, and they lived together in a harmony such as Nunez had never known in the world outside. And in this time, something happened with which he had not reckoned. In the house of the elder whom he served, there lived a young woman by the name of Medina Sarote. She was the youngest daughter of the house, and in the eyes of the blind, she passed for little attractive, for her lids were not so deeply sunken, and her face not so even as their sense of beauty required. She had therefore remained unmarried, and the other men of the village had no eye for her, if one may put it so. But to Nunez, she was the most beautiful thing he had seen in the valley. He looked at her face, her fine features, her long lashes, and what to the others counted as a defect appeared to him as grace. He began to seek her nearness, and Medina Sarote, who was little regarded by the others, listened to him. She was the only one in the whole valley who attended to his strange talk without at once declaring him mad. When he told her of seeing, of the sun, of the mountains, of the stars, she did not understand it, yet she heard the sound of his voice and sensed that he spoke of something that was sacred to him. And so an affection arose between the two, and out of the affection came love. The love between Nunez and Medina Sarote grew, and at last he took heart and asked for her hand. She said yes, but with that the difficulties only began. For when the matter came before the elders of the village, it met with decided resistance. Her father was aghast, and the elders shook their heads, not because they held Nunez to be a bad man, but because in their eyes he was ill. How, they said, could one give a girl of good family to a man who suffered from such a disorder? The man spoke of things that did not exist. He claimed to perceive things that no one could perceive, and he clung to this delusion with a stubbornness that made all instruction useless. He was not of sound mind, they said, and therefore no match for Medina Sarote. They deliberated over it a long time. Medina Sarote wept and pleaded, yet the elders remained firm. And at last, the village doctor was called in, a respected man to whom great wisdom was credited, and he was to examine what was really the matter with this Bogotá. The doctor felt Núñez over carefully, examined his head, and probed his face for a particularly long time. Then he explained to the assembled elders that he had found the cause of the trouble. The man suffered from his eyes. These formations in his face, which in all other people were small and sunken, were in him swollen and distended in a diseased manner, and they contained a moving substance. From these sick organs there proceeded a constant irritation that reached his brain and continually disturbed and distracted it, and from this came his confused talk and his restless manner. The elders heard this with great gravity, and the doctor spoke on and set before them that there was a cure, a simple and certain one. One need only remove these sick things from his face, and then he would become a perfectly healthy, calm, and useful person, a true citizen of the valley. And then he could also marry Medina Sarote. One need only, then, take away his eyes. When Núñez learned what had been resolved, he was shaken to his innermost being. They wanted to heal him by taking from him the most precious thing he possessed. Once more he tried to explain to them what seeing was and what they wanted to take away from him. Yet they listened to him as to a sick man who talks in a fever, and their kindness was only the indulgence one shows to a man not accountable for himself. They meant well by him. That was the worst of it. They were convinced that they were doing him a service, freeing him from his affliction and opening for him the way into a healthy, happy life. Núñez turned to Medina Sarote and sought help from her. He spoke with her as urgently as he could of what he would lose. He told her of the small, beautiful things, of the flowers, of the lichens on the rocks, of the soft sheen on a piece of fur, of the wide sky with its drifting clouds, of the mountains in their greatness, of the sun that rises over the peaks. And Medina Sarote listened to him and wept. Yet she too did not really understand him, for she had never experienced these things and could form no conception of them. To her they were beautiful, sorrowful words without content. And in her heart she too believed that the elders and the doctor were right, and that her beloved really did suffer from something that tormented him and separated him from her. And so at last she herself begged him to do it. She told him he should do it for her sake, so that they might be together. She said she loved him, and if only he would let these sick things be removed from his face, then nothing would stand in the way of their happiness any more. And Núñez, torn between his love for her and his horror at what was demanded of him, wrestled long with himself. At last he gave in. He consented. The day was appointed, and the operation was to take place the next morning. The evening before the appointed day came, and Núñez sat outside, alone. It was the last night in which he would be able to see, and he looked about him, as a man looks about him who is taking his leave. He looked at Medina Sarote, at the face he loved, and he impressed it upon his memory. He saw the last golden rays of the sun fall over the rim of the rock walls. He saw the mountains towering high above the valley, the snowfields glowing in the evening light, the wide, high sky. And something stirred in him that was stronger than everything else. He saw the beauty of this world, and he grasped with a clarity that gave him back all his strength that he could not give it up. Not for love, not for belonging, not for the peace of this valley. In the early hours of the next morning, when the sun rose and the blind were all still sleeping, for the day was their nighttime, Nunez got up. He looked one last time down at the village, at the houses of the people who had tolerated him and, in their way, had even been fond of him, and at the house in which Medina Sorote slept. And then he turned away and went off. He had no provisions, no tools, no equipment. He had nothing but his eyes and the mountains before him. He began to climb, up the steep rock walls that enclosed the valley, and he searched for a way out, upward into the heights and over into the world from which he had come. It was a toilsome, hard ascent. The rock tore open his hands, his clothes were shredded, he fell and picked himself up again, and with every hour he grew weaker and more sore. But he climbed on. And when evening came and the sun sank behind the distant peaks, Nunez lay high up in the mountains, far above the Valley of the Blind, exhausted, battered, hungry, and cold. He could go no further. He stretched himself out on the cold rock and looked up. Above him arched the wide sky, and one after another the stars came out, countless, clear, shining stars. And Nunez lay there and looked at them, and he was content. Bruised, alone, and without knowing what the next day would bring him, he lay beneath the starry sky and smiled, for he had kept his eyes, and he saw. That was our short retelling of The Country of the Blind by H.G. Wells, a story about a man who believed himself superior and who had to learn that no one alone decides what is real, and a story about what a person is willing to sacrifice in order to remain himself. Good night, and if you like, we'll hear each other again tomorrow, here at Sleepy Classic Tales.